Outstanding, great. Hey, we're excited to be here, to be this part of the activities on innovation. I have 3 people that will be joining me on the stage for this great discussion, so we're gonna ask them to come on up. We have Kristen Brown from Exelon. Kristen, come on up. We have Manish Rukadekar, if I got that right. Come on up, there's steps on this side. Okay, that side's fine, that's fine. And then we have Emily Royale, if I got that correct, coming up from the city of San Antonio. Yeah, we're gonna have to get a little bit cozy here. And maybe we're gonna take mine down a little bit. I've got a big booming voice as it is. All right, great, good deal. So we're here to talk to you today about the digital transformation, but in particular to talk about what's happening with data, with AI, and how that transformation can improve the delivery of services and actually help the utilities achieve their objectives in terms of where they're trying to go. With a particular lens on the intersection between smart cities, the utilities, to some degree even how the private sector fits in there. So we're going to start off by actually allowing each of our panelists to just introduce themselves and give just a couple of minutes on the top priorities that they're kind of thinking about and working on right now. And then we're going to come back and go a little bit deeper with some questions. With that being said, we'll start at the far end over there with Emily.
Hi everyone, my name is Emily Royal. I am the Smart City Coordinator for the City of San Antonio in the Office of Innovation. Data is a priority for our office in many ways. As a local entity, we try to treat data as much as possible as a public asset, as a public good. That means that in our projects, which as you guys all know in smart city projects, where we are putting emerging technology into public space, it inevitably collects data. And to the degree possible, we want to provide our citizens with access to that data where it's non-sensitive, et cetera. We work extensively, not just on delivering on that promise, but also on finding new and innovative ways to communicate with our citizens about the value of data and what it means. For a lot of residents in San Antonio, your day-to-day life, you may not realize the kind of data trail that you create by participating in a variety of services, whether they're public or private services. So we try to educate them on that. We have a data communications plan that is going to be released hopefully this winter. That is going to be the beginning of our discussions around data in what's called the Smart SA partnership, and that's a partnership that our office runs with 8 other typically municipally owned utilities and organizations, including CPS, the San Antonio River Authority, the San Antonio Water System, the Housing Authority, in order to deliver and collaborate on smart city projects together. A project that we are working now with CPS Energy, which I'm really excited about, is our Smart Street Light project. This is really the first partnership or project that we're releasing under the Smart SA partnership, and it will be bringing in 3 vendors to pilot smart city, smart streetlight technology in our innovation zones. That includes everything from sensors attached to streetlights that detect air quality, temperature sensing to determine where the heat island effect is, for example. We also are looking at parking sensors, flood sensing, and all those use cases come directly from our partners and are included in this RFP. So we'll be deploying that in November. We'll be studying it very closely to try to understand how data is generated from this project and what value it can pose for our community. So that's a little bit about me and my role in the Office of Innovation.
Hi, my name is Manish Rukadekar. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
My name is Manish Rukadekar. I'm Manager of Business Planning and Development at DT Energy. For those of you who don't know DT Energy, we are one of the largest utilities in the Midwest, both electric and gas customers. We serve about 3 million roughly electric and gas customers. Our electric territory is the southeastern part of Michigan, and then our gas territory is the rest of the state of Michigan. My role at DT is I'm on a task force to make our rates more affordable for customers. Just recently, a month ago, we made an announcement that DT Energy will be a net zero emissions company by 2050. We have invested a lot of capital in terms of making our generation portfolio green. We have invested over $3 billion over the last decade in renewable energy. We've also been investing in a state-of-the-art natural gas power plant. And we have also plans to invest about $4 billion over the next 5 years in upgrading our distribution infrastructure. So as a result of that, there's been a lot of upward pressure on rates in terms of the capital investment. So my role is at TT is to basically generate ideas for the business units to help reduce O&M costs. So reducing energy costs, reducing O&M costs, and improving margin is what my teacher, the task force, is responsible for. Thank you. So I'm sorry. So that's the task force is responsible for. It's basically getting more revenue, sales basically, and reducing costs. So where does this all fit into the technology space? So it's basically to come up with ideas using leveraging technology so we can reduce our operational costs, reduce our marketing costs. So some of the ideas we have is how can we reduce our marketing costs by doing some propensity research for customers that are able to so we understand the attributes of the customers that participate into, let's say, our energy efficiency program, and so we can better target them. We have a great opportunity in the home energy management automation space with our DT Insight app, which is the app that allows customers to see their energy usage in real time and take actions to help reduce their energy usage. And we are leveraging AI in the sense that we are able to disaggregate the load at a household by different load types, HVAC, lighting, and then things like that. So just an overview of some of the things that we're doing.
Sorry, Kristen. It's my bad.
No problem. So Kristen Brown with Exelon Utilities. Exelon as a corporation is the largest clean energy utility in the country. We own a large nuclear generation fleet as well as wind and natural gas. We own a retail arm, Constellation, that's 2.2 million customers across the contiguous 48. And then the part of the business that I'm in is our regulated utilities. So we're 6 distribution utilities. The majority of them are electric and gas utilities, but our largest is ComEd in Chicago at 6 million customers, and the remainder are Baltimore Gas and Electric, PECO in Philadelphia, Pepco Holdings, which is a combination of Pepco, DC in Maryland, Delmarva Electric in Delaware, and Atlantic City, New Jersey. So that gets us to 10 million electric and gas. I sit in the regulated innovation arm under our strategy and policy group. And what we've really been focusing on is this transformation of the electric utility to a platform business. And when we think about what that means in terms of data and innovation, fundamentally at the core of an effective platform is an efficient and effective IT and communications infrastructure. So when I think about data, I can think about it on a bit of a 2x2. You have internal data that you use that we use for our own optimization objectives. There's external data that customers and increasingly third parties are looking to help grow products and services. And then there's customer data, and then there's grid data. And we're doing work as a fleet of utilities across all of those different areas in each of those quadrants. There's a huge initiative happening internally right now called Business Intelligence and Data Analytics, which is taking the multiple streams of data we have from our OT and IT systems into a single data lake to make that available for our employees to run analytics. As part of that, and I think the communications around data is so important, there's external communications to our customers and our stakeholders around what data means. There's internal communication to our own employees about what the importance of that data is. And our EU analytics team has an analytics academy to help our internal employees leverage tools, some using AI, some just simple optimization algorithms to figure out what to best, how to best leverage these new data streams that we can combine. From an external standpoint, we can get into this. Energy efficiency, of course, leverages data. We've been partnering with Amazon, with Alexa for a long time. Obviously, that leverages a pretty sophisticated AI platform. But what we're really trying to do in transforming to the platform business is think about how do we use the data that we have, not only to benefit our own internal O&M reduction goals, which as Josh mentioned, are critical to what we all do on a day-to-day, but really think about what this data means for animating new markets and helping meet the needs of our customers.
All right, thank you. So as you can tell, we have a group of panelists that are well versed in these topics. One of the interesting things for me is being in the industry for a long time, I've been able to kind of watch this evolution actually occur. And yesterday when we were listening to some of the startups and the exciting things they were talking about, a lot of it all centered around what we can do with the data, whether it's customer data, whether it's grid data, and how we can actually use that to transform things. So with that being said, one of the issues that I know utilities have is with all this data occurring, they've been collecting data for years, data historians, et cetera. Now, there's an additional amount of data they can now collect that's created an incremental explosion, if you will, of data. So how is that volume of data being used in some of these solutions that you all are seeing trying to bring innovation to the utilities? So I'm going to work in reverse order this time. I'm going to start with Kristen, all right? And then we'll kind of go from there. How are you seeing that being managed in a sustainable way and then being able to actually bring value to it?
So I think the best example is how we're using all that information internally, because that's where the majority of this information comes from. So I mentioned our BIDEA initiative. I believe that started, what are we in 2019 now? Probably 2016, 2017. And the idea there was to really figure out how do we manage and then use these huge amounts and multiplying amounts of data that we see. What we did was create, again, this single data lake where really the majority of the effort has gone into cleaning and merging these data sources. I think what's important for the startup ecosystem to understand, if they haven't been directly involved with the utility sector before, we're working off of a lot of legacy equipment with a lot of poorly implemented IT systems due to the lack of prioritization from installers on how the IT systems and the backends connect. We're there about safety. We're here to make sure that things operate efficiently for electricity transfer. There's not necessarily that double check that's happened to make sure the data itself is coming back. So we've spent a lot of time trying to figure out how do we pull in data, how do we clean data, how do we merge data. Once we get that, I'd say that's not really a step we have to finish, that's an ongoing process, but then we've laid out a series of priority analytic services that we're looking to develop across a handful of different dimensions. So the first is in operational maintenance. So predictive analytics is always going to be probably top of mind for us as a utility. So we've been working on that with a series of microservices and third-party vendors. And then we have services across internal operations, including control center analytics and customer call center analytics, and then customer outreach analytics. And so each of those areas has a specific roadmap for the analytics that are priority number one, and then what we'll build out in the future. And that's what we're really focusing around, like I mentioned, through the Analytics Academy to help train our customers and have that be a much more pervasive part of everyone's day-to-day journey at the utility, rather than it being just under our IT team.
Right, so I'm hearing you say capture the data is certainly important, but cleaning the data and making sure that it's in usable formats, and then aiming the data at trying to solve some specific challenges the utility has, and making that kind of a way of life, right, as you go forward. Very good. Manisha, you talked about some of the home applications on the consumer side, and obviously there's a lot of data associated with that. How are you all looking at capturing that data, and how do you determine what's the right data to capture to kind of enable what you're trying to do with the utility?
So let's talk about the home automation or the smart home energy management arena. So with the DT Insight app and the bridge that we have, the customers are now able to connect to various smart devices, thermostats, lighting, and are able to get better control over their energy usage and take actions. So one of the things that we introduced with that was an advisory feature where, based on the historical consumption patterns of the customers, it's machine learning where the app is able to determine, provide custom alerts to customers about their energy usage, so they can take action about it, whether it's HVAC or any other, primarily HVAC. So it's a good feature, because that way the customers can not only learn about their energy usage but take some action as a result of that, which will help them save energy and money at the same time. Another example of that would be leveraging data. By the way, we have 100% AMI deployed in our service territory, so we have access to a lot of data. And the question always comes is, what do we do with this data, right? So to the extent that we're able to get interval data and we're able to help with some of the large customers that we have, commercial customers, that's actually a great thing because you can save a lot of energy from a decarbonization perspective. And the customers appreciate the fact that we are able to solve one of their biggest cost, expenses, which is energy. So one of the things we did was strategic energy management pilot, which we have now commercialized with some of the hospitals in our service territory, where we were able to look at their AMI data and build a regression model with a company called Leidos that we worked with to be able to find out, okay, just by doing simple things like changing the thermostat setting by so many degrees, you're able to actually reduce so much energy. So being able to identify those low-hanging fruit problems or ideas that we could solve, we were able to help the hospital, and then we actually made that a commercial program now. So that's an example of how we can leverage data, not just in a home setting, but also in a commercial setting, to draw insights into the data. So my take on this is there's a lot of data. There's a proliferation of data, not just from the customer side because of the smart devices that I mentioned, but also on the grid side, right? We have all these smart devices and sensors that's generating data. So from a utility standpoint, I think it makes sense to sort of draw the right boundary around, okay, what data really is meaningful, what data is really useful, that we could leverage to ultimately make some decisions that would benefit our customers, whether it's investing in a technology, whether it's in an app, whether it's as simple as whether I should be dispatching crews on a daily basis to, can I avoid sending crews if I know through leveraging technology, through either by better diagnostics or preventative maintenance technology, can I not dispatch those crews and save the customers money? So there could be, you have to think outside the box. So at the end of the day, it's leveraging the data smartly is where we're coming from.
Absolutely. I hear you talk about predictive analytics, and certainly as we consult with many companies across the country, we see predictive analytics really coming into bear. And something else you talked about, which is taking this data you've collected for a primary purpose and then repurposing it for something else. But all in all, at the end of the day, as you collect the data, it still has to deal with issues of data privacy. So Emily, I want to come back to something you started with earlier.
Yes.
You were talking a bit about kind of data privacy, data strategies around that. Tell us a little bit more about how, as you hear some of these points and as you guys are already looking at it, you are balancing achieving some of these innovative ideas with protecting data rights and data privacy.
Absolutely. So I'm with you, Manish. There is so much data out there, right? And as we develop new technologies, there's so much more opportunity to collect new types of data sets we didn't even realize we could collect. So as a public organization, public entity, we always have to start by asking ourselves, why? Why are we collecting this data? Should we? Right? Because we know that there's really no boundaries to what is possible in this emerging landscape. So we try to start from there. Should we collect this? And really empower our residents with awareness about what we collect when we do. What does that actually translate to? Well, that means when we do something like an agreement with our partners to share data, we make that agreement publicly accessible. Not only do we make it publicly accessible, but we're striving, and I think we're going to have this by the fall, to translate those agreements that's in that legal language that is so overbearing and is not meant for normal people to understand into what I would call Texan, right? So we're working on a project right now. Everyone understands Texan, right, y'all?
Yeah.
So we're working on a project right now to take one of our interlocal data sharing agreements with our 8 partners, as I mentioned earlier, putting it on our website and taking all of that language and putting it side by side with a simple statement that translates each item that's in there so that our residents can understand what this means. That's really an important first step for our city to come out and say, like, we recognize this landscape that we're all in, and we want to equip you with the tools to understand how this landscape's evolving and what we're doing, what we're able to do with data, and where we can empower you by giving you access to it where that is reasonable, right? Clearly, we don't want to give residents access to other residents' private information or customer information. We have to be very careful about that. So where there are data sets that are assets to the public, and what I would typically call those are environmental data sets. So things like air quality or temperature, industrial data, environmental data, not customer data. we want to turn those over as much as we can so that we can fuel innovation. The next phase to this, I think, for any municipal government really is a little bit of an ego buster, and that is we don't have the answers to every problem, right? So how can we create information flows that give our residents access to data so that they can help solve problems? And how do we build opportunities and programs around that? A good example that I have of that right now is the CivTech SA program and the Geekdom Incubator. Shout out to Joyce. Joyce is running the Geekdom Incubator. I'll tell you guys about that. So these two programs, the purpose of them is to unlock data assets and challenges from our city governments to our residents to play with, right? So we basically say we've got 15 challenges this year. It comes from all of our city departments. Here's the data that's behind them. Can you build a tool or a technology or a solution to solve that? We ask our universities to work on these challenges. We ask our entrepreneurs and our local startup ecosystem to work on these challenges. And we ask our young people, right? So that's kids between the age of 6th grade and 12th grade to work on these challenges. We've actually found some pretty awesome successes in that space with young kids, as old as 11, coding applications that our city departments are like, wow, we can use this. And should we buy it from you because you're a child, right? So we're kind of navigating these interesting spaces and opportunities as we unlock more access.
Great. So my next question is going to be a toss-up question. So let me kind of lay it out as you guys kind of prepare for it. So I like to say when I was a boy in the utility long time ago, the enterprise was very localized, right? All we cared about was generating the power, distributing the power, bill the customer, get the money, life was good. And of course, over the years, this enterprise really has become very extended, right? It really is an ecosystem now, and we go all the way to the customer, to the consumer, and we do a whole lot of different things now. But for innovation to really matter, we really have to get down to the level of behaviors and capabilities being put into place. So as I'm going out and talking to different people at utilities, one of the biggest struggles I hear is we have all this data, but we're trying to figure out which capabilities we're going to put in place with it. So I'm just wondering, in your daily walk, in your conversations, what kind of business capabilities are people trying to put in place with all this data across the ecosystem, whether it's inside the wall of the utility or whether it's on the outside that connects to the utility? I'll give you one example as a lead-in, right? Robotics process automation. Mm-hmm. Lots of people are using it. Data powers quite a bit of it. Mm-hmm. So that's a capability that's now become fairly standard, although not always deployed everywhere, but that's a capability that's enabled by that. What are some other things that you're hearing about that are kind of beginning to take shape? Who would like to go first? I saw Kristen make the first mic move, so we'll go there.
Start. So, okay, I'm on. I don't know what mic this is. Okay, I'll just do it. So.
Here we go.
So that's a huge question, right? Because there's so much going on, and I think every startup that's talked to us probably has some solution that leverages some piece of data, right? Or it wouldn't be valuable. I think there's two things that I've personally focused on within my role at Exelon, and a lot of it actually dovetails from when I was at the Department of Energy before I joined. Shout out to Josh for being a fellow former ARPA-E and all the startup companies that were funded by ARPA-E. We love you guys. But I think, one is really interesting, and it's changing the paradigm of grid operations itself. And when we talk about becoming a platform model, it's moving from this pipeline business of generation to distribution to utilization to not just management of that energy at the customer premise, which is kind of the second point that I'll get to, but thinking about management of that electricity at the distribution level and how much data can help us completely rethink the distribution operations paradigm. And I think that becomes extremely important because as we start to think about what the role of a community is in our energy use and what we think about the role of the individual, they're no longer just energy takers, they're energy participants. And the way that that energy flows can help an individual really leverage services in a new way. And the amount of data that we're getting off of not just AMI meters, we're also full deployment of AMI except in New Jersey, but distribution automation equipment, we talked about PMUs and microsynchrophasers, that type of information, these types of new edge control architectures from a physical device standpoint can really help us completely change the paradigm of how energy is optimized and how bills are reduced on the system. The second thing that I find to be so compelling, and I try and drive this home for our executives, is this concept of data exchanges between the customer and their information and then the information coming off devices. Traditionally, that had just been the demand response space through smart thermostats and maybe HVAC systems. And every demand response company right now is moving into the DERM space, and we see in Europe moving into flexibility markets. And I think what becomes important there is understanding that there's this pull from startup companies to create value for consumers in their devices, in new value streams, in new revenue streams that require information from the utility, like AMI information or bulk generation and wholesale information that we typically have been hesitant to provide. And in absence of that direct relationship with the utility, these companies are finding other ways to get that information, and really creative in a lot of AI-driven ways. And so as the utility, what we've been thinking a lot about is how do we create partnerships with these companies so we're providing value so they're not going around us to get information, but we're able to be the steward of that information in a way that keeps our customers safe and secure and keeps their privacy levels not to go the way of like Facebook and et cetera, right? Where we live in a much different ecosystem as a regulated entity, and we're obviously seeing Facebook kind of be challenged by the federal government in that. But I think these roles of the third parties and trying to pull this information and think about how do you do this bi-directional exchange between a customer, the utility, and then the third party is something that we won't see stop, and is really starting to just unlock this financial value for customers that we haven't been able to see in absence of some of the things like AMI information.
Very good. Emily?
Yeah, so to build a little bit off of what Kristen is saying, when it comes to exchanges, yeah, so a big challenge for us is when data is flowing through all of these different entities, right? Whether they, and I'm not speaking from the lens of utility because I am a municipal government, but a utility or, for example, any one of our 8 partners or a citizen, right? That's either pushing or requesting access from a central or a cloud stored location for this data. A question for us is how do we automate that process and secure it? And so right now I'm really interested in like decentralized blockchain systems that potentially validate transactions on a transparent blockchain ledger, right? So I'm kind of curious right now about how that emerging technology can potentially serve a problem that we have very much so, which is, hi, I'm public citizen A, and I'm tapping into this platform requesting access for a system. How do I get validated as being a citizen? And how do I recognize or understand which data sets I am allowed to have access to? Or I'm partner B, or I'm executive C, right? Like what kind of data sets, how do you validate my identity, right? And then how do you validate what data sets I have access to and automate that whole process so that we're not just emailing each other data sets or responding to Freedom of Information Act requests by email and attaching, PDF attachments of data so that you can't actually download it. You have to literally type into your own spreadsheet the numbers that are in the PDF, right? This is the reality that we are operating in right now. So I'm really interested kind of in a similar realm, but maybe expanded slightly, beyond just the utility, but the third party piece too, right? We have partners, we have citizens, we also have a business community that can innovate and develop prototypes off of data where it's accessible. So we're kind of interested in exploring that realm.
Absolutely. Manish, I want to give you a slightly different question because you're probably ready for this one, so I got to mix it up a little bit. So when we think about the ecosystem that's out there and that's required to bring about the kind of innovation that we're talking about, there are lots of people that need to collaborate, need to work together. And to some degree, need to coordinate and kind of line up. So I'm curious, how do you see organization to the ecosystem coming about? Who should kind of lead the organized collaboration? Or to put it in perhaps in a sports analogy that works for me, who might be the quarterback as you're trying to bring these things together? What's your view of that?
So my view is that just like how I said, we need to draw the boundary around data. I think at the end of the day, we are a utility, we are the traditional cost of service model that worked for years. I understand we need to change that, we need to innovate, we need to understand the evolving needs of our customers, and we need to innovate. But at the same time, we're still working with the Public Service Commission, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we are still serving our customers. And we have to provide value to them to the extent that we are able to identify what products and services brings the most value to them as customers. I think the utility will be successful. I'm of the opinion that the utility should be the trusted source for the customer when it comes to energy-related matters. To the extent that the utility is able to do that, I call it success. So, for instance, the customer calls in to the utility. Do we have the ability to know who the customer is, first of all, right? Do we have a sophisticated way of knowing this customer has called in so many times with these issues, they're on these programs, they're on these rates, they've participated in these programs. And knowing all this, I will definitely solve the customer's problem, but here's other value-added products and services that I can offer that the customer would benefit from. So do we have that level of sophistication? We're migrating towards that. We have, like the propensity example I gave you, if you only knew what are the attributes of the customers that participate into our programs, we can then target market those customers with our products, and we will have better success in adopting those products, right? So we will reduce the costs of marketing costs in doing so. So I think my philosophy is that, yeah, we are a utility. We're still working in the cost of service realm. We still are working with the stakeholders like the Public Service Commission. But we have all these external factors. To the extent that we are able to bring value, we're able to put the right business case around all these different things and not just get swept by all the different things that we see around us, but just really prioritize and really say, okay, these are the top things that I will be working on that will really add value. I think if we took that approach, I think more pragmatic approach, I feel like we will be more successful as a utility. And still keep our eyes on the technology aspect, the customer's evolving landscape, not lose sight of that, but be more pragmatic in terms of the framework that which we operate and how we can work within that framework and add value. I know it's hard, but I think working with stakeholders is key, working with partners, industry partners, the players which are outside of the energy industry, right? We have telecom, we have auto, we have tech industry, now entering into this. So it's important to have the partnerships, the right partnerships to be able to be successful. But again, we have to be able to take a more pragmatic approach without losing sight of innovation, I would say. And it's
Kristen, I'd like to ask you the devil's advocate position on this. So I'm with you. I'm an ex-utility guy. But I also know that the utilities have to balance kind of their legacy environment and their legacy commitment to deliver service. And if you heard the prior session, we know the culture of some utilities are a bit reticent to adopt innovation and change because frankly, they don't necessarily have the burning platform of some other industries. Given that, and we heard what Manish said, I'd like to ask you kind of the devil's advocate position. If the utility takes that position, won't that stifle innovation?
So I liked where you were going into that last leading question at the end. But what's interesting
Take it where you want to take it.
is you sort of read my mind there, because as Manish was talking, again, thinking about what Josh and Jason talked about earlier, I'm not always taking the controversial opinion. Now I have an out for that. I don't know if we always are the best people to do that. I think in theory we would love to be that. I folks know from yesterday, I asked a lot about white labeling, right? We still have this desire as an industry to maintain customer primacy. There's nothing wrong with that. When a solar installation fails, when a retailer is untruthful to a customer, the utility is still the person that the entity that gets called because of that, even though they don't have that relationship. And that's something we need to be careful about, is the ecosystem participants, their failures can often reflect on the utility, regardless of whether the utility has had a direct role in that. And that's something that we need to be cautious of when we're working with these partners. That being said, I think, we are really in a place of huge transformation, and not everyone is at the same place about what that transformation means. And so when I think about the types of conversations that our utilities have had that have really pushed the boundaries, I think NextGrid in Illinois was a great one, PC 44 in Maryland, DC MedSys, those were all really good, proactive, regulator-led dialogues that helped move the needle and bring third parties together. That being said, those can be contentious environments because you're there and under most instances, NextGrid aside, under a docketed proceeding, so you're trying to lead towards legislation. But there are third parties who I think, we do a lot of work with RMI, and I think, not to plug RMI, but they've been a great thought partner in bringing together from a policy lens different stakeholder entities and really pushing the envelope and putting people out of their comfort zone. Where I get nervous sometimes about it being solely utility-led is we can't get out of our own way sometimes, and so it's beneficial to have a third-party broker who's really there to make our executives see, make our employees see that the world is changing and force us to be creative. I've been in environments where we've tried to do this internally and someone said, literally, I don't have the capability to think more than 5 years ahead. And it's good to have that self-awareness, but that self-awareness doesn't help us prepare for the next 10 years. And so we need these environments that can really push us forward and bring stakeholders together to really understand it's not about protecting the fortress, it's not about maintaining our regulated status, it's about thinking around how partnerships in a new role of participating in an ecosystem can help benefit the customer, and that's not taking value away, but that's increasing societal and marginal value.
Absolutely, well said. Thanks for playing devil's advocate.
So that's basically my job description, is really getting people to hold hands and tell them that they're safe innovating, right? Which, is pretty much done by telling them and being honest, like, this is not safe, right? This is not gonna be a safe space. Innovation is hard, and it is challenging, and it is risky. So for me, working across the interests of multiple partners, and yeah, y'all utilities, man, you guys are always running the show. But yeah, I mean, we really have to navigate so many different perspectives, and they're all valid in this space, right? Like, what the San Antonio water system really needs today is just as important as, what CPS Energy needs today. And so for us, we have to balance all of that, and really try to push the boundary a little bit and push the comfort zone of our partners. And I've found that those little baby steps, those small, consensus, like, a lot of times we just agree to agree, but we don't actually agree on a thing. But the agreement to agree is really valuable. And to me, that's kind of like a little window. I'm like, okay, we agree to agree. Where can we move from here, right?
Very good. I have a couple more questions for the panel. However, I always like to leave time to make sure that the panel gets to interact with the audience. So let me just take a moment and see, is there anyone out here that has a question for our panelists on either the things we've talked about or things on your mind before we go any further?
Sure.
Oh, you can't love hearing me ask questions all that well. All right, we're going to far back first, and then we'll come up to the front. The tall gentleman in the back.
This is Paul Hines from Packetized Energy. Your comment, I think, about working with these consultants is really interesting. And I'm interested to see how you use those to decide what types of startup companies to work with, or what's the role between, like, startup company or consultants like RMI and the startup incubator space?
So, great question, and I appreciate you introducing yourself at the beginning. I'm too nosy to not know who's asking the question. So I'm going to say something that doesn't directly answer, and then I'll try and directly answer it. So there's this great HBR article that came out 5 or 6 days ago around how innovation theater tends to be more important than actual innovation. And I really like it because it talks about how companies that are process-oriented, like a utility, we meet our responsibility to serve because we leverage economies of scale and efficient operations, or we hope we do. And we hope our regulators hold us accountable to that. But what that means is that we focus so much on the process of innovating. We bring in consultants to help redo the strategy. We host large innovation forums. We go to meetings with more consultants. We do employee engagement. We do hackathons. And then we realize that none of that leads into anything. And so then we actually start to review our internal processes to see how we can make things move faster. Those are all great, but what product does that lead to at the end? And I'll say I pulled those directly from the HBR article, so that's not my brain, that's Stanford's brain. But I think what becomes important is while we go through this process, to your point, is to keep an eye on what the product we're trying to deliver is. And there's not an easy answer for that. So what we've done, and what my team in particular has done, is to say, you know, we have these big perspectives that come out of these consulting engagements. But what are we seeing in the ecosystem that makes this real and means that we need to be reacting and responding today? And traditionally, the role that I've taken on this is by actually sitting down with our executives and saying, here's this theme, and here are these companies that are gaining traction, that are actually doing things in this space. It's not the vision, this is reality. How do we think about this? Does that always lead to action with one of those companies? No, but as you know, it's about the long-term relationship, and it's about putting those seeds in the right place. Right. But in some cases, it does. A good example is blockchain. For better or for worse, I did a blockchain presentation to the executives, and now a lot of our utilities are looking at it, and in some cases, doing partnerships. And so planting those nuggets and those seeds based off of those frameworks that they've been given through these consulting arrangements and tying it back down to a specific company has been really helpful to actually drive action. The thing that we have to do, again, though, in getting out of our own way, it's still not a fast process. And the fastest we've been able to make it is through working with the large consulting firms, Accenture, Deloitte, et cetera. Working with small businesses still takes a long time for the business to get comfortable, and we have to figure out the process that leads us to that kind of product. And to be honest, as a huge IOU, we're not quite there yet, but it's something we're actively working on.
Kristen, I think you kind of largely answered this with what you just said, but I'm going to rephrase it a bit and open it up to the rest of the panel. I don't think there's an official Hippocratic oath for municipals and utilities, but I think in the forefront of everyone's mind when it comes to innovation and pilot projects, it's do no harm. And that's no harm to the revenue model, no harm to my safety record, no harm to my reliability. But it also hampers that, the efforts of new companies to bring new technologies to market. So can you think of an example or a way that the industry could get over that hill?
So I'll say anecdotally, it's funny, I think it was maybe at a GridWise conference, I was on a panel and I said, we need to work faster and iterate faster. And then an executive was asked, oh, Kristen from your company, who's in the back over there, say hi to her, said, work faster. And he said, no, we don't need to work faster. That's what we have partners for. And I'm like, oh, this is, thanks for calling me out, question asker. But it's really hard. I think what the challenges, and we see this even across our fleet, is the desire of every single utility to test every single thing. And EPRI's been a good body to do this, but largely around operational improvements. There's customer improvements that we need to understand differently. And to be honest, what we've done is we've taken a partnership approach. We're doing deeper case studies with more real information. We're partnering with national labs. We're bringing startup companies into the mix. And we're helping people see in a more quantitative way the value, which helps us, but it also helps our regulators. And so when we can go with something that says, here's a much more quantitatively grounded rationale for what we're doing. There's more freedom to approach that rather than just speaking in hypotheticals. But I think we'll get over this hump because as the startup companies, especially in the competitive retail environments, are able to work directly with consumers and not have to go through the regulated utility, we'll be able to start to think about leveraging those partnerships and tying them in. But I guess I don't really have an answer on how we do, but these guys do.
I just wanted to add to what you just said. So I think policy makes a huge difference in terms of how utilities can innovate. So I'll give you an example. In the energy efficiency space in Michigan, 5% of the total energy efficiency spend is allocated for doing pilots. So that is like a sort of a laboratory approach where you can bring in new ideas and test them out, and it may not always be successful. It's okay to fail as long as you tried and you learn from it, right? So I think that's a perfect environment where it's okay to spend the money to actually find out if you're delivering the right product to the customers eventually. And a lot of our programs, energy efficiency programs especially, have come through this pilot phase, and they have been very successful, like the strategic energy management pilot I was telling you about. So I think there should be some policy in each state that would allow the utilities to innovate. I think that would make a huge difference in terms of how utilities can actually take those risks and actually go over the hump that you mentioned.
That's basically what we've done. So we found some success in small-scale prototype pilots in what we have designated our geographic regions where we're allowed to do that. And those are our innovation zones. We have 3 of them. And we work with multiple partners to achieve those pilots. And then all the partners come back and look on that pilot and assess, was that successful? Is this something that we should scale citywide? Who was it successful for? How do we modify and adapt and pivot potentially? So that has value not just to the partners that are interested in potentially procuring the technology, but also for the vendors themselves, because they can actually test in a new market and achieve some information or find some information about the value of their product in, particular in San Antonio's market.
Okay.
There was a talking point that I totally forgot about. So we have this connected communities strategy that we've just launched, and similar to that, each of our utilities has determined a community in their service territory that they're doing just that with. And an example is BGE in Annapolis just signed an MOU for this connected community. The mayor of Annapolis, very progressive, very excited about helping his community, evaluating new technologies, and so that partnership allows us to be able to test some things that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to test. However, when we start to think again about the type of things that might be risky, like smart streetlights are one thing, right? Customer behavioral programs, new rate designs, that's kind of a different class of testing. And so it really just depends, I think, on, like you were saying, where do you get your buy-in, what the actual type of project is, and what the risk to the consumer is, and how you're creating kind of a backstop for that risk.
Fantastic, thank you. We have about a minute and a half. One last thing that I'll just put out for someone that can give us a quick answer on is all of us operate in environments that have some sort of a regulatory pressure. And I'm curious if you, and I use that term broadly, if you find that regulatory arena helping to drive innovation, or do you find them more of a hurdle or an obstruction to innovation? Anyone that wants to tackle that?
Both. I think there are some really important fail-safes in place, in particular in procurement, that are very important. We do have to be transparent, be held accountable, we have to be equitable. On the other hand, I think at the state level, we do have a lot of regulation that is actually quite inhibiting to us. An example is Senate Bill 5, for example, prevents any municipality in Texas from being able to use their own municipal fiber in a competitive market against internet service providers to provide internet access. In a community that has a very big problem with the digital divide, that's a problem because we literally cannot serve our customers in that space. So it kind of depends on where the regulation's coming from, and always just finding, right, that balance.
Fantastic. All right. Well, certainly thank you all very much. Would you please join me in giving a hand of applause for our panelists? Thank you. Right on time.